All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. That's working now. Yes. My video working. Yes. All right. Well, thanks for coming. Also, thank you everyone in the Zoom call. This talk is a bit interesting because when I first was drafted for a group of friends, I didn't really have a solid idea of what I wanted to talk about. But it all goes around a technique called discursive meditation. So I was kind of thinking, like, how can I find an excuse to talk about all these things and like how they work, what's their role in ceremonial magic, in occultism, and in the Western mysteries, in the training of an occultist in the Western mysteries. So I just decided that the Coelbren was a good topic to just use as an excuse to go over the topics and also to talk about a few interesting stories and characters over the story of the history of occultism. So what's the Coelbren? In general, it's an alphabet, and it's a Welsh alphabet. But why is it relevant? So in magic, we have this, in the practice of magic, we have these things called magical alphabets, which they are basically used to concentrate and focus the will and the imagination of the practitioner to achieve several things. It can be meditate on them, or perhaps visualize them, or like in Judaism, that they use the names in Hebrew with their corresponding values, and in meditation, in ceremony, in a bunch of things. It's basically a complex symbol, and that's how we use magical alphabets. Is anyone familiar with ceremonial magic? You're familiar? A little bit. Oh. So if there's anything that I'm going too fast with, we'll talk about it. And we'll see more about that later on in the presentation. But the Coelbren in general was it's an invented alphabet by a guy called Iolo Morgano. He's a Welsh guy, and he was an antiquarian and also a forger. So basically, what he did was he created this very complex philosophy based on the Welsh bardic tradition, like the poetic bardic tradition. And since he was not really having a way of making a living, he decided to forge manuscripts because he was a really good poet. He learned the meter and the traditional ways of writing poetry in the bardic tradition, and it was a huge success. So he grabbed a famous guy. He claimed to have been found manuscripts, and he published it. And there he went, and he wrote it in the original Welsh, in Middle Welsh. So in contrast with other forgers, if they asked for the originals, he could provide the original, at least the original, right? So that's what it is. But we will go a little bit further because the aim of this talk I want it to be is usually in ceremonial magic or in occultism, the aim is a bit lost between all the robes and the wands and the swords and the names of power and the magical circles and all the fantastic stories that we hear. And sometimes we forget what is the goal of the practice of magic. So yeah, that's we will talk a little bit about perception, about what it means to recognize something, if it exists or not. We will talk a little bit about language, and we will talk about how that relates to meditation in general, or discursive meditation, which is actually the title of it. The traditions that we have in the West. No, they don't see that, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, just it'll pop up here, but I don't think it obstructs the presentation. All right. So the traditions that we have in the Western world, like the magical traditions, they're going the same line as our civilization. They basically started in Babylonia, in the Mesopotamian civilization, which is now the area of Iran and Iraq, and mostly what it corresponds with the Assyrian Empire. Hmm? Yes, yes, yes. So Zoroastrianism, Hermeticism, the traditions of Egypt. That's where it starts. This is a few examples of some of the bodies of knowledge that conform occultism, and in particular, this is astronomy or astrology. This is Babylonian from 200 BCE. The one on the right, it's a tablet of an astronomical tablet. It's all good, Josh. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll stay on top.
Perfect.
You're good.
Should we hide the chat box because it keeps popping up?
Oh.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
I can ignore.
Okay, thank
And
you.
yeah.
Josh's on top.
Yeah, so they would actually the astrology that we have today, it's almost exact in practice and the way that we calculate it as it was in Babylonian times. This is a statue of a priest and an astronomer or astronomer with a king, with an Assyrian king, or Babylonian king rather. And the other two are cuneiform tablets that talk about. They basically would gather data. See events happening on civilization, check, and for hundreds of years they would have enough data. They would realize, oh, maybe when this happens, agriculture suffers this or that, or when this is conjunct to Mars, then maybe war is coming, something like that. This is the reconstructed Magic Gate in Nineveh, which is the same area. It's reconstructed because ISIS, the paramilitary group, not the goddess, destroyed it in the last 2 years, but that's one of the remains that we have from that civilization. So all these traditions really start from that, pass through the Greco-Egyptian world, classical world, Roman world, Middle Ages, Renaissance. They come to us, and we'll just do a quick survey. Mostly, we'll see some pictures of to put ourselves in context. This is another artist rendering of Nineveh. You've heard of the Babylonian gardens. Probably was a very lush time.
Hanging gardens?
Yes, of Nebuchadnezzar, I think it was called, the hanging gardens. Yeah. And also I think the word, I don't quote me on this, but I think the word paradise means walled garden. And it comes from Babylonian times. This is a few archaeological items as well from the Babylonians. They had these huge figures with the body of a bull, the wings of an eagle, the head of a man. And I'm missing one. So it's 4. I remember it. So this is just archaeological evidence that we have from them. This is, if you've seen astrological charts, you would probably recognize the picture that you see on the right. It basically looks the same as just like a wheel in astronomy these days, in astrology, sorry. So mostly between in the 19th century, where we saw the rise of Egyptology and archaeology and this like a very curious aspect of the ancient world, we started finding all these things. We didn't really know much about ancient civilizations before the 19th century. So we found these clay tablets that were baked with the cuneiform inscriptions. And there's probably many more. And it's these tablets and the discovery of the tombs in Egypt or the archaeological findings that we see a rise in the 19th century in archaeology, history, and also occultism. What can be more exciting really to find, try to picture in your mind what has been happening behind it. So it's the same practice today, right? It's the same circle divided in 360 degrees. In hexadecimal parts, the day in 24 hours, and the zodiac in 12 signs. The same things that we used to do. There's also Egypt. which really there's a joke that says that God created 10 parts. If you could divide magic in 10 parts, he gave the Egyptians 9 of them. They were very into it. We won't go into details, but they mostly in the later, like in the later parts of the Egyptian civilization before the downfall. Magic was a very popular practice, and it was not seen as religion. For example, in Demotic, for example, which is the ancient Egyptian language, there's no word for religion. It's magic, but synonyms. So we can see a little bit how they were. They had this notion of magic in their everyday lives, from the preparation to the death, to cross these souls, or in the case of pharaohs, to remain in this everlasting land. Which is, but let's not go in a tangent there with the Egyptians. It's an image of an Egyptian temple. It's like a rendering. And all through this process, let's go a little bit faster here. This Isis, another Egyptian depiction of the mysteries of Isis, which was like the cult of Isis in ancient Egypt. Another Egyptian depiction. So let's remember now then that as we're passing through this body of knowledge or magical knowledge, which we haven't really defined, but every civilization added their little bits, every culture added their little bits, and in general it conforms then for us 2500 history back from its inception to now, with a bunch of breaks in the middle, and mostly after the Industrial Revolution.
So there was a whole time period where it was buried. A lot of it.
Yeah, so let's say that after the Roman Empire started falling, and when it became very politicized, and Christianity was already the main religion, not the pagan religions, it just started dwindling, and it went away with the onset of the Dark Ages. Yeah. It didn't go away, but it remained like in clusters, mostly with monks and some philosophers. That's where we get Marsilio Ficino, Agrippa, Giordano Bruno.
Grimoire tradition.
That's, yes, in the Middle Ages there's a lot of the Grimoire tradition, for sure. So after the fall of Rome, we have this period where magic becomes more like a folk thing. It's no longer like a highly priestly class. It becomes more like a folk tradition. And it was not until the Renaissance, where they started to look back into the classical times, that they started recovering and putting together what we could from this knowledge. This is a painting from a celebration that was held in Greece a long time ago, which we call the Mysteries of Eleusis, I think. Eleusis is how you pronounce it. And they were based on the myth of Persephone and Demeter. So we will go a little bit of what went into that, just to show how it was the involvement of magic in daily life in those times, what it meant. In particular, magic not as seen as cursing your enemies or falling in love with someone or getting money, but rather about one of the central topics of the Western mainstream, which is initiation. So this is one of the first examples that we have of initiation, the Eleusinian mysteries. And basically, in the month of, let's see how you pronounce that, Boedromion, which is roughly as our September, there was a special time in Athens, in classical times. And on the 14th of that month, heralds from the little town of Eleusis, some 20 miles from Athens, they brought sacred and secret things concealed in little baskets. We don't know what they were to this day. And they were placed for safekeeping in the temple, in the local temple at Eleusis. Then the next day, everyone that wanted to take part of the event gathered in the agora, in the marketplace, and they paid their fee of 15 drachmas to the priest or the organizer or whatever, and then they would hear the official proclamation of the ceremonies, of the mysteries. It's worth mentioning that participation in these rites was not limited to gender, nationality, or a bunch of things, which is kind of rare for ancient times. So it was a very festive celebration, and there were several other mystery traditions along the same time that this was going on. This is just one of them. And eventually, we have a very famous mystery tradition that is similar to this, which we now call Christianity. It started as a mystery celebration with the apostles and the mass in the corners of Roman society. And using the same framework that we will go on, we will talk about in a few slides further down. It's the same techniques, basically, that were used before. So to make the story short about the Eleusinian mysteries, there were two guys. There were the epoptai and the mistai. Basically, the guys that were coming and the guys that have already gone through the process.
Which is which? You said epictai?
Yes, epoptai and mistai. I think epoptai is the first ones and mistai is the ones that have already come. But I'll confirm that in a second. No, it's the other way around. Mistai is the initiates, the first ones, and epoptai is viewers.
Okay.
So it's the ones that are like supporting or coming for a second time. So among several things, purification, sacrifices, and taking a bath in the sea, and fasting, they would do this. They would take these sacred things. They would chant "Iake, Iake" or something like that along the way, while the priests are leading the way to the temple. They would go and meet the Hierophant in there, basically the priest, and something would happen of which we do not know. But what we know is that it's based around the myth of Persephone and Demeter, and in a way, what all this is doing, or the purpose of initiation really, is to establish a symbolic narrative based usually on the life of a god or a goddess or something like that, so that you can resonate better with it and you establish rapport with that aspect of the divine, which is what we want to achieve in magic, really, a sort of communication with this inner realm we call spirituality, instead of just basing ourselves with texts or practices or groups that usually don't go very far. There's not a central guiding post. So there's a bunch of details into that. They would even have brew a special drink called a kikeon, which is like from Mediterranean herbs, and they would drink it, and it was very ceremonial, ritualistic. And they would go in stations. It's like a small pilgrimage that would culminate there. At some stages, they would be greeted by people. At other stages, the epoptai would be wearing masks and yelling obscenities at them. So sort of like a very dramatic course of events with these mysteries of Eleusis. Which really start because the legend goes that when Persephone was being chased by Hades, she was taken care of in the city of Eleusis. And as a gift in return, once everything results in the mythological narrative of Persephone and Demeter, they give the people in Eleusis two things. One of them is agriculture, the science of agriculture, and the other is the science of letting human beings enter to the realm of the gods, which is what they call initiation, and how to, in the moment after that, being guaranteed like a good place in that afterlife. So those were the mysteries of Eleusis. And there's many others. Let's see. What's in the picture here? There were many others in many other cities there, and they were mostly local affairs centered about the traditional story of a god or goddess, which were enacted in a ritual fashion. So in a different way, different ways of celebrating the mysteries of the same deities became common all over the ancient world. The details varied, but the principle was always the same. By participating in the reenactment of a sacred story, at a certain point in the seasonal cycle of the year, the initiates of the mysteries establish an inner connection with the spiritual realities that lay behind that story, which are very allegorical usually. That's one of the temples in present Eleusis, Greece. We can help our imagination by imagine it less decayed, and perhaps there's a fire going somewhere. There's incense. There's the epoptise standing in line with the palm leaves, just shaking them at the sound of Iake Iake going all the way up to the temple. Must be quite the celebration, really. That's Persephone and Demeter on the right. And another illustration of the myths of Eleusis, the mysteries. And in this way, we can also see how the ancient view of the world, it's very different. It's much more about observing the big things outside and trying to synchronize with those things that they call the seasons or the gods or the mysteries represented by them. That's Isis on the left, but that's Roman Isis. I don't remember the name of that little contraption that she's holding, but they would. It makes a noise when you shake it. It would be another element of that part. Another mystery cult that eventually around the same time became popular was Christianity. And borrowing the same technology, we can see that the image of the Virgin Mary holding baby Jesus, and there's archaeological evidence for this, is it was an image from Isis holding Osiris. And why is this important? Because when we talk about magic, we really talk about technology, a way of doing things through myth and allegory, and focusing the imagination with the sense and the paraphernalia and the somewhat theatrical fashion of a ceremony. You can accomplish fantastical things by changing the state of consciousness that you are with. And one very important element of magic along those lines is symbolism. So in this case, we have symbolism of a god reborn or born into the material world, which was carried over and copied into Christianity, and then using the same pagan technology, we have the Christian Mass now, which is basically the same technology under a different dressing. So this principle about initiation and getting in contact or establishing an inner connection with the spiritual realities that occultists work with, we can talk about the same things, but in less exalted terms in this talk, which is basically about what is language, is communication, and what we want to communicate with. In this case, we want to communicate with the divine, or with our inner selves, whichever personal mythology you prefer. So the means to attaining that and the way of training that communication can be used. Part of that practice can be a magical alphabet, and the rest of the techniques of occult practice, like ritual, meditation, divination, sigils, and all those things we see today. But it's the same idea, really. We want to focus and establish a communication with the unhidden causes of things that the hidden causes of the things we see here with our senses in the physical world. So this communication really that we want to establish is not the same that we have with language. If I need words and grammar to talk to you, but to talk with these hidden aspects of ourselves, it's more about symbolism much more similar to what psychologists do in Jungian therapies and dreams. So this language for this communication that we want to establish, let's say that someone wants to cultivate a relationship with God. And they can pray in English, Spanish, or whatever they want. But that goes only in the surface of consciousness, which is the very rational layer of our minds. It's the newest layer of our brains too in evolutionary time. But symbolic language can take us much more further. And that's why it's an important tool. And it can be kickstarted with a magical alphabet. And in this case, it's the Coelbren. These are the two editions of a book called The Coelbren Alphabet by John Michael Greer, where he talks in much more detail parts of the story that we're going to talk about. And even though we won't do it in full ceremonial way, just like the initiates of Eleusis did, and go to the top of a telesterion and do all these things, and we could if we wanted to and had the resources, of course. But the same idea is the same, and we can go to a different temple, which is not necessarily a temple made of stone. It could be an inner temple in a way, and we're still moving. We're not moving in space. We're moving in consciousness. So in a way, we can use these techniques, magical techniques such as vanishing rituals or focusing on specific sephira of the tree of life. You move your consciousness and you attain things that way. Right. So this is how it looks like. The Coelbren, those are some of the letters. They represent all the sounds that can be made in Welsh. And they have a vaguely runic vibe, even though they're not really runes. That's on the left. And on the right, we can see some of the Hebrew characters. The first one on top spells one of the names of God, which is Yod He Vav He. And further down on the image, we see, I think that's from the Sefer Yetzirah, which they would ascribe several letters to different parts of the body, just like the Chinese do with acupuncture and all those kind of things. So in a way, and this is where our story becomes a little bit more Welsh, because in Druidry, which is one of the traditions that came out of England, it's like a modern reworking of pagan spirituality. We don't really have a magical alphabet to work with, as the Kabbalists do in Hebrew, or the Chinese with the Kotodama. Sorry, the Japanese with the Kotodama, which is another magical language that they can put to use for magical purposes. We didn't have that until a bunch of scraps were put together, and now we have the Coelbren alphabet. So this Druidry movement started off from, what's the next slide? There's a book called Bards by Iolo Morgano. It's a forgery, but in that book, he sets out in poetic form, almost allegorical. He sets out what he would call the secret of the Bards of the Isle of Britain. And he would gather a bunch of the mythology and practices of what they knew of the ancient Druids in Britain. And he forged this book called Bardas. And in that book, he speaks about a magical language that holds the key to the secret of the Bards of the Isles of Britain, which is the Coelbren. But he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't go in detail about what the letters mean. or even how to pronounce them, or stuff like that. So that's when we start with this little story about Iolo Morgana. Let's also remember that for a very long time in history, perhaps not very long, but for a considerable amount of time, the practice of magic was illegal in the Western world. That's why we only have fragments of this. And that's why the Theosophical Society has also done such a great job of making it able for us to talk about these things in public. So we've gone through ancient times, and in the onset of the Industrial Revolution, and with the increasing popularity of things like positivism and rationality of the very literal kind, these kind of philosophies that were happening in France just around the French Revolution, magic and occultism started to be seen more as superstition, as we were talking about earlier. So it went from the science of the learned and the priestly classes and the educated to just be like a folk thing, or these old things that we used to believe. Now that we are in the industrial age, we have this conquest of man over nature with technology and science. But that was not for too long, and it started to reverse. But it is here then, around the 19th century, that the characters of our story really start to take shape. And also the characters and the forces that make our story. We won't really go in chronological order, but more about how they relate to our present topic. So as I was saying, Iolo Morgana, this forger and national hero in Wales, by the way. I don't know if we've already gone through his picture, but we'll get there. If not,
when did you live?
He was born in 1750 or something like that. So in this book, Bards, it's a vast collection of Welsh Druid lore, partly compiled and invented by Iolo Morgana, and then edited by one of his students, John Williams was his name. According to Bards, the Coelbren alphabet had been passed down by successions of Welsh bards and lore masters since the days of the ancient Druids, according to him, and formed the key body of hidden lore, which they would call the Cifrinach Berut Inis Pridia, or something like that in Welsh. I hope nobody of you are Welsh. I'll be slaughtering your language. It translates as the secret of the bards of the Isles of Britain. And today, practically all scholars reject the validity, or rather the authenticity of Iolo's inventions regarding this. However, these kinds of things start to pose interesting questions, because even though he invented it, he used it. Like, this language can be used in Welsh. And as we will see, Iolo was also a little bit crazy himself. He had an addiction to laudanum, which was like a tincture of opium in England. So it's possible that we can speculate that between his inspirations, of poetic inspirations of these Celtic lands and his addiction, he lost a little bit track of what was true and what was false. He would collect a bunch of manuscripts as well. So he was very educated in his tradition. So whatever he invented is definitely inspired by true sources, so to speak, even though he himself wouldn't, or historians today wouldn't consider it a valid ancient language or alphabet. So John Michael Greer, when he saw this, I don't have a picture of him here, I think. These are little. Yes, there's gardens. And these little wooden sticks, they have poems in them. They're four-sided and they have one line on each side, and you would turn them. And basically, a body of knowledge would be transmitted that way. Or with YOLO students, because again, this is not really, before YOLO's time, we don't find any archaeological evidence of this. But he used it with his students, and he became a very important person in Wales. And even today, his rites and ceremonies are still practiced, even though everybody knows they're not authentic. But they're still valid because they work, just as the mysteries of Eleusis did, and just as Christianity does, because the technology, the method behind it is what matters. So Druids or Druid occultists in ever since like 200 years ago or a little bit more have been lacking a magical alphabet, as the Kabbalists have with Hebrew, which is very useful if you want to make a sigil or a talisman or something. You can use the names of God in that and make and use it to focus your will and intent of your practice much more powerfully. So we didn't have that. But Bardas explains some of its history, or of its legendary history rather. There we have John Williams at Eden, which was one of Yolo's students. He assembled Bardos, which is a huge book. It's like this thick, compiling Yolo's manuscripts. So John Michael Greer tells us in his book that after assembling a magical system based on Celtic spirituality, which is called the Celtic Golden Dawn, you can find it right here, based on the Golden Dawn, if you guys know what that is. It's a magical order in England. He set out to try to track like the history of the Coelbren, and he started with Bardos, which is the only place it's mentioned. And he finished it. Like he meditated on the book. He studied the book. He tried to find leads from the time. He couldn't find anything. And the story goes like this. One day he was in Appalachia and went to how do you call this, secondhand bookstore, like used books. And in the grammar section or the languages section or something like that, he found the book by linguists, which was, the name of the book was something like A Grammar of Welsh Languages or something like that. So at this point, he knows about two things mentioned in Bardas. There's the Coelbren, its history or its mythological story. There's another one called the Alphabet of Nineveh or something like that. Nineveh, something like that. So that's all he had regarding to the origin or meaning of these letters. And once in this bookstore, he picks up that book, opens it at random, and gets a quote. I think I have it here. So who have it? So it's an old possibility that that Iolo actually invented this from scratch, or maybe he was basing himself off ancient sources. We don't know, and it doesn't matter because what matters is that it works. And but we can see also that it was meant to be carved. That's why it's just straight, just as runes. It's meant to be carved in stone or wood. There's 24 of them in the most popular version. And it was basically used as a practice to convey secrets in a way, in allegories, which would be preserved in the little wooden things. So they look a little bit like runes. They look a little bit like the Owen. So that's maybe where he got the graphical inspiration, make them. But there's, besides that, there's nothing else. There's no other commonality between runes and this other alphabet. So Bardas actually says a lot about its origins, its history, its traditional uses, but it really doesn't say anything about the letter meanings or the names that were used for the letters, like even the names of the letters. Lacking those pieces of the puzzle, the Coelbren has remained silent for 160 years now, or 260 years now. Some people have attempted to assign it meanings, but they've kind of based from the runes, and they don't really work. It was just like an attempt to put something together. But it is very clear from passages in Bards that it's very important to Yolo's teachings in terms of symbolism and in philosophy, like Celtic philosophy. So those small wooden sticks with notches had some passages of Bards, for example. The Welsh word Coelbren itself means omen stick, just like the ones we saw. Somewhere here. Technically, if you write them in stone, you don't have Coelbren, you have Coelfen. That's the word for stone. So we have this he finds the book's opens it and sees a reference to the alphabet of Nineveh. And then starts reading. I'm going to just read you the quote of how he narrates how he found it. The book Maurice Jones cited, which is this grammar book that he found at the secondhand bookshop, was one that I had never encountered. Dos part edrin dofud au, or a grammar of medieval Welsh that appears to have been compiled or invented by Iolo Morgannwg. Edited and translated by Williams, Dos part edrin dofud au, was published in 1856, and like most of the products of Iolo's Morgannwg circles, dropped out of print and out of sight shortly thereafter. What the alphabet of Nepnibus was doing in such a volume was a puzzle. Had the bardic circles around Iolo Morgannwg made use of that alphabet instead of the Coelbren? I wondered. Or was something else going on? That night, I set out to find a copy of the book. To my delight, it had been scanned and archived on the internet, and within a few minutes, my elderly computer was struggling to download a 10.5 megabyte file over a bulky connection. A quarter of an hour later, maybe, I started paging through the file. The alphabet of Nepnibus was there. So was the Coelbren of the Bards. And after a few minutes of reading, I found myself staring with my mouth open at the thing that so many people in the Druid community had been pursuing fruitlessly for so many years. A detailed discussion of the symbolic meanings of the Coelbren letters and the inner structure of the alphabet itself, which had been penned by John Williams 160 years before. That's a copy of the book. Of the first book, not the second one, that where he found the meaning. This is the Welsh grammar. So this is Iolo. All right, so that's, we have another picture. Yes. So that's it. On the right, we have the tomb of Iolo in Wales. With his name, you can't see. Can I zoom in? Yeah. It's a shame. Well, you can't see it, but he has some stuff written in the Coelbren there, along with his bardic name, because his real name is Edward Williams. And on the left, we can see a depiction of him. Of all the pictures that I found on the internet, none of them look the same. So I just guess the forger had many faces, as they do.
So this Edward Williams, it was almost like his magical name or his pen name was Iolo.
Iolo Morgannwg, which means Ned from Glamorgan. Glamorgan is a place in Wales. which we really haven't talked much about the bards. I think we will for a little bit, but basically I think it's, if I recall correctly, the oldest poetic tradition in the Western world, which goes back in an unbroken lineage until the 6th century. And the bards in those times were not just storytellers; they were counselors. They would keep genealogies of kings. So they were really the wise people, the bards and the druids of the ancient times in Celtic lands. The inscription on Iolo's tomb reads "the truth against the world," which takes a very interesting meaning with the topic of this. We'll come back to it. From Bardas, the 3 necessary functions of a bard: to teach and explain all things in the face of the sun and the eye of light, to praise all that is excellent and good, and to substitute peace for devastation and pillage. His real name was Edward Williams. You can see another picture of him on the left. The only thing that they seem to agree on, all the pictures, it seems to be about his nose. Seems to have had an interesting shape. If you see the one here, again, I don't think you can see this small picture, but on the bronze plate, you can see a very different head, like the shape, but the nose is the same. So we know that's him. Another rendering of him. In this picture, you don't see him. Underneath it says, Iolo Morganu, the Bard of Glamorgan. And he's holding a poem with the 3 rays of light inscribed on the top, which is one of the sacred symbolism of the Druids. We'll come to that too. That's all right. Okay, so he was born in 1747, not 50, but close to it, in a small village in the country of Glamorgan in Wales. And his father was a stonemason, and he picked up the trade. So he was not very good at it, apparently. At least the history tells us. He then moved to London, and there, let's also remember where we are in Welsh history. The same as we were seeing that occultism and magic were seen as superstition, there is not that attitude was not only pertaining to the realm of spirituality, it was also to the realm of man, right? Like now we have the enlightened man, the rational man, the scientific man. Before it's the primitive man, the superstitious man. So along with all that, Welsh culture was kind of or Celtic culture was kind of like in a dangerous situation where it was being replaced by this strong influence from London. And even before that, we have this complicated history with all the invasions of the land and the different tribes that eventually became what we now call England. So he moved to London, and he there contacted he became a member of a society called the Wendigian Society, which was basically dedicated to Welsh historical scholarship and studying of everything Welsh, but in London. All this, let's see if I can find the picture. That's the picture. This is one of the ceremonies that Iolo himself devised, being enacted today in Wales. It's an annual festivity, and it still carries a lot of the national pride of the land. So it's interesting how something that allegedly is fake has become so real. So it really poses the question: what gives magic its power? What makes a tradition valid, even if not authentic? There's authentic traditions that don't work, and there's invented traditions that work just like the other. So let's give a little bit of context. Around this time, George III was in the English throne, and English men and women were already beginning to dress in the styles that would make the Regency era one of the greatest ages of gorgeous attire. Across the channel also, revolutionary violence gripped France in the Cannondale of Valmy, which was a battle in the French Revolution. And on the other side of the Atlantic, George Washington was just finishing his first term of this newly founded country we now call the United States. So that's where YOLO is being born. Or Edward Williams, a stone cutter in Wales. And then he launched and claimed what he claimed were the ancient teachings of the Welsh bards. Let's see the image of YOLO there for a moment. Now, to understand YOLO and his impact, it's necessary to start with Wales, really. There's this principality in the western flank of the Isle of Britain. Some 12 centuries before YOLO's time, as the Roman Empire tumbled into ruin, it started getting sacked by barbaric tribes from other parts of Europe, Northern Europe, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, and other peoples coming from Germany and Denmark. So they took advantage of the collapse of the Roman Empire, which also included a section of the Isle of Britain, mostly the southern part. And all those things blended together, all those tribes and cultures blended together into Angle land, based on the Angles, one of the tribes there, and became what we now call England, Angle land, England. Now, Wales is an interesting land because I should have, I think I have one. I should have put a picture of the Welsh landscape. But you can imagine very dramatic mountains and cliffs and a lot of sheep. There's more sheep in Wales than humans. And this is an actual fact. So we have this national identity crisis, which to step back a little bit, in these invasions from other parts of Europe, it was Wales that kind of preserved. Wales and other areas was one of the areas that was less affected by these invasions. They retained their own independence until the 13th century. And even though they got incorporated into Britain, they still retain their legal system, and they have a very distinct culture from the Scottish and from the English. So YOLO comes in at a time where there was no Welsh identity, because we were talking about how this racialist era was putting all those things into superstition. And so here we have a poet that can write amazing poetry and mystical writings in Middle Welsh in a time where machines aren't all the rave. So he was kind of born a little bit in an odd time, but he saw a lot of inspiration on this. So in a way, he saw poetry and his work and his creation of bardas and his creation of groups of bards. They would gather and he would travel around Wales teaching. And he would teach for the rest of his life after a while. So in this national need for the sense of identity is where YOLO really had an opportunity to raise the spirit of a personal mythology in a way for the Celtic people. It is the 6th century. It's the oldest bardic tradition from the 6th century. A properly trained bard, at least the mythological bard, was expected not only to be able to compose verses in the demanding meters of traditional Welsh poetry, but also to have by heart a wealth of traditional tales, to preserve genealogies, as we were saying, histories, general sources of learning and knowledge in the community in which there lives. But as England entered into the industrial world, all these things were increasingly harder to fulfill. So the Bardic tradition only remained alive in half-time jobs by people with full-time jobs. But it still remained an important part of the culture of it still remains today part of Welsh culture. We've talked about Yolo. We've talked about a little bit about his travels. And while he was in London, now we are in this slide, this is where he started encountering the ancient poetry of the Celtic lands, of the Welsh lands rather, and where he started his work of let's see if I can pronounce the name of that guy. It was a bard. Let's just call it William. He was very impressed by this guy when he found his poems in this ancient meter, and it was so much so that a few years later, perhaps a decade later, which this century, by the way, was very apt for forgery. So all this curiosity in the ancient artifacts. So he would compose another set of poems in Middle Welsh in the ancient meter, but under the name of this guy, of William, and it became a huge success. In his time, it became a bestseller. Not only because of a newly discovered artifact, but because it was actually hailed as one of William's best poems, which eventually was found out was a forgery. But he had learned because he didn't publish an English translation of an undiscovered manuscript. He wrote the actual thing. So in a way, more than a forger, I guess he's more of a bard born in the wrong time. He's using the same sources and the same beliefs and the same techniques to achieve the spirit of inspiration that the Welsh call the awen, which is their central idea. It's where inspirational life sprouts from. And that was very much closely to what Yolo believed and taught to his students. He even actually published a book. I think this is him, yes. Poems, Lyric, and Pastoral in 2 volumes by Edward Williams. This is Edward Williams, not Yolo Morgano. As he was becoming more popular in London, he eventually did what today we would call a Kickstarter, and published that book with the help of a few people, including George Washington, apparently.
Was he a Freemason?
And
by any chance?
this guy,
Yeah, everyone.
he's related to Freemasonry, but he was not himself a Mason. He was a stonemason, but just symbolically. But his story meshes with Freemasonry. Which origin starts in Scotland.
How did he get that Kickstarter going back then?
Magazines.
Okay.
So basically, if people wanted something, they would publish like, "Hey, we need." They would put an ad in the newspaper or magazines. In this case, probably was through this Welsh community that he found in London. So he wanted to. He already had fame. At this point, people don't know that he's a forger. So he had fame as an antiquarian, an historian, and even his poems, his fake poems, were hailed as one of the best poems in Welsh literature. So now he wanted the real thing. So he published under his name, but he didn't have success this way. His mediocrity for business and his addiction to laudanum didn't really give him enough structure for him to maintain a structured life. So unfortunately for him, he really didn't have any business at all. So even though this prints, everything else around him, in monetarily speaking, was actually kind of collapsing around him. And he actually got in debt and got into debtor's prison, which is what it's apparently something they have in Wales. So he was brilliantly qualified for a profession that no longer existed. A court bard to a medieval Welsh aristocrat would have been like his appropriate place. So he had not really to worry about being questioned in his time. He was master of the things he was talking about. It was until way later where historians started really to notice that there was no trace before YOLO of the things that he was talking about. So after that, he kind of got erased from history. Like historians got really angry. Like they felt cheated. But YOLO was not concerned with history. He was concerned with magic. So for him, it doesn't matter if it's authentic or not. So more forgeries followed of YOLO. And then in that process, he also tried to publish his book. But he did get the successful Kickstarter, getting even into America. Like he became an accomplished forger and writer in London. Now, the mystery surrounding YOLO's documents, Bardic documents, is that simply nobody knows which parts of his lore is true and which is false. Which one he got from inspiration and which one he filled in. But part of his lore came from the many documents that he studied since his time. There are things in Bardas that are certainly YOLO's inventions. But there's other things in Bardas that resemble very closely Renaissance hermetic philosophy, for example. So the possibility is still there that Bardas and the Coelbren was put together from pieces rather than completely invented. So he spent to finish talking about YOLO, he spent the last 30 years of his life traveling and making Bardic circles, and to his inner circle, he would teach the secret of the bards of the Isle of Britain, which allegedly the Coelbren is the key. The ceremony talked about. So we only really know about YOLO because of Edward Williams at Idel and his son Taliesin, which became one of his students. So that's why we know about him. But to his Bardic students, YOLO really handed an extraordinary body of knowledge regarding Bardism, symbolism, wisdom teachings. According to him, Bardic teachings went all the way back to the beginning of history, to the myth of Einegan the Giant, which is this mythological figure that he created. Basically, it's the Welsh Adam from the myth of Adam and Eve. Where this guy, Einegan the Giant, witnessed 3 descending rays of light that brought the world into being. In those rays of light was all the knowledge that ever was or would be, and Einegan, beholding them, understood some of that knowledge. In order to preserve what he had learned, he took 3 long straight branches of a rowan tree, cut them into staves, and carved the first of all the letters on them. Sometime afterward, though, others who encountered the 3 staves worshipped them as gods instead of learning the wisdom that was written on them. And Einegan was so distressed by this that his heart burst and he died. A year and a day later, after Einegan's death, the story continues. Many of the old happened upon the giant's skull, lying neglected in the field. Through the skull's eye sockets and the mouth grew the 3 rowan staves, which had taken roots and sprouted leaves. And the wisdom that had been carved upon the stave was still partly legible. Studying that wisdom, Minu became the first of the bards, the lore master of the Welsh people in the distant past, before he, the mighty, the great Druid god, led them to the shores of Britain. it was after the Welsh came to Britain that the Bards were divided into 3 orders of Obids, Bards, and Druids. And the Bards received their portion of wisdom of Einigan to transmit to the centuries. That's part of Bardas and how Iolo is talking about creation. And this is where it gets more interesting, and we start to take the Coelbren as a stepping stone. Because we're clearly not talking about giants, historical giants. We're talking about metaphorical giants. We're talking about creation. We're talking about what it means to create, or what it means of this ongoing process that happens all the time that we call life. For example, using the Coelbren symbolism, let's go a little bit afterwards. So there's some hints that he lived in Bardas regarding these secrets that apparently is hidden as part of one of the names of God for them, which is the Awan, which is the symbol that we form with the 3 rays of lights, which is a ray going this way, one straight, one the other way. It has some interpretation, but for this point, we just need to understand it as a sacred name. So in this mythology, he would say that the blessed A, the first letter, would contain all the letters because they are modifications of it. And all sciences, not only because they are represented by letters, but because they can be learned from an acquaintance with the several attributes of God. And we can keep going through this, but what it's basically saying is that, in a way, there's some sort of secret that it's hidden, and there's also a way for us to get attuned to that secret. And that secret relates to creation. That secret apparently relates to God, or some of his attributes, and can explain all the explainable things. This is true of language, right? So here we're working with layers of symbolism, right? We're talking about language. We have an alphabet. We have an alphabet that apparently was created at the beginning of time to express what, to communicate what. What's the process, or what's the importance of that sort of communication, and how does that relate to spirituality, or in this case, God or the gods. This is just a little snippet from Bardas, where he talks about the meaning of these 3 letters, which, interestingly enough, it writes as Iau. It's close to Iao, which is a Gnostic word from the Gnostics, if you know who those guys are, which is perhaps another hint of the things he started incorporating to his practice. This is another bit where he's talking about the symbol that these 3 letters make. You can't see it from here, but if you take the one on the right, the 3 rays downwards like that, and then have the other one underneath it, and then the straight one on top, it looks like a broom, like a sweeping broom. So there's symbolism to that. He starts to, it's called the Dasgubel rod. Dasgubel means sweep. How do you call the thing? Sweep. Broom, thank you. I just said it. So what is the Dasgubel rod, they ask? It's the key to the primitive Coelbren. What is it that explains this primitive Coelbren? It is the Dasgubel rod. What else? The secret of the Dasgubel rod. What secret? The secret of the Bards of the Isle of Britain. What will divulge the secret of the Bards of the Isle of Britain? Instruction by a master in the virtue of a vow. What kind of vow? A vow made with God. So again, in this little snippet, what it wants to convey is not that there's an actual secret or a piece of information written somewhere that I can go and tell you, this is the secret. Now you have it and spread it. It's much more about what steps is it giving you to attain this communication with God, with the divine, with yourself. And what's the way to do it? The secret is in the Discursive Rod. What's the Discursive Rod? The story of creation, this myth of how knowledge came to be. Then it got represented by words. People misunderstood it, misunderstood the teachings. The giant gets angry, destroys it, because this should not be spoken. The name of God should not be spoken, some traditions say, right? Because it will be misinterpreted or misunderstood.
Like the Tetragrammaton.
Like the Tetragrammaton. So that's why it has this cyclical relationship to it itself, because the secret is not a secret in itself as a piece of information. So we've talked a little bit about the Coelbren. Now let's see it. It's composed of 24 characters. We've talked about authenticity and validity. Authenticity is if it is what I say it is. So in this sense, it's not authentic, but it's valid because it's a valid language. It conveys words put in a language, and it's actually has been used to write poetry for quite a few years now. So it's a valid language, even though it's not an authentic language. And we also know that Iolo backed it up with a forged legendary history. Here on the right, we also have a depiction of a Celtic god. That's He the Mighty. And you can see the script in there on top. Some of those are the characters as well. The first 16. Here it's complete. Some of the scripts. Some of them are A, E, O, B, C, D, G, Li, Mi, Ni, B. But let's just take one. This is U. It means wholeness, completeness, unity, the background or context in which other things or actions have their place. This comes from these definitions that Iolo had written, and the book was found many years later.
In that grammar.
In that grammar book, yeah. So in that way, the Coelbren can be used for divination, just as we use tarot cards. We get some sticks, write the letters, and now we have a Coelbren set. So just as a tarot, we ask a question, throw it, and get an answer. This is one of the meanings of those cards. And the Coelbren in particular has something which is called sound symbolism, which is just as an image can represent something. In this case, it's a sound that represents something. For example, curse words in very different languages usually sound a bit similar. They have R sounds or F sounds or sh sounds. It's based on the sound that they make, that the letter makes, that the symbolism comes from. In the Welsh language, of course. So in this case, if you get this letter in a reading, it might indicate that the situation is already complete or is moving toward completion on its own, and doesn't need any external input. One way of laying out this for divination and practical divination is, well, you can of course get one, but you don't get much meaning from one single stave. You can do a reading with 3, where it would represent the situation. The one on the left would be the situation, the one in the center would be yourself, and the one on the right would be the outcome, for example, just as you do with the tarot. This is an example reading, but we don't have to go over the details. So another spread with more parts. The beginning of the thing that you're trying to understand all the way on the left, what shaped it before it came into your life, how it affects you, how it will develop in the future, and where it will end up. Let's say we're talking about love in this case, so you will have all these things being shaped into your reading. So that's for divination. But the most important part for this really is the symbolism aspects, and I hope I can cram that in 6 minutes. So let's talk about symbolism itself from this bit from Bards. It says, a symbol is a form that is understood, and being understood shows at sight that which really exists, which would require many letters or much of vocal song or speech and oration before it could be properly understood. So it's like a zip file in a way, right? It's a very compact thing, which otherwise would require many, many words to say. If you said you use a tetragrammaton and you show it to a Jew, it means so many things, right? It's not necessarily, or you can write whole books, but you can just say it in a single letter. It can also be used for something we call scrying or active imagination, which is this visionary trips that you take in your mind. There's a process to it. If you know the process, you know what to do. But in this case, we'll just talk about it. In the phase where you rise from your chair in your imagination and start walking towards an imaginary door, you would picture this like a dolmen made out of stone with the letter that you want to explore written on top. Let's say the letter A. So you would get into a meditation posture. You would call the meaning of the letter as you have understood it so far. Imagine the letter, and before the portal, or after the portal, scenery starts taking shape. And you let it. You walk a little bit, cross the scenery into it. And at that point, you usually call for a guide in your imagination. Is there somebody here that can show me the meaning of this word or this letter? You can just go by yourself, but it usually helps in the mind to ask for a guide. And let's say, like in a sample working, somebody in their mind sees a mountain, a spring below the peak, a stream of flowering towards the sea, a salmon, seagulls, and some other stuff in his trip. Comes back out of the session, closes himself, and now has a bunch of interesting things in his mind to think about. So what does that mean? Which is where meditation really comes into place. You would use something that what we call in occultism, it's a theme for meditation. So in our case, you would get, in this case, mountain or the spring below the peak. And you would hold it in your mind for as long as you can. Not for as long as you can, for a few minutes in your practice. And after that, you would let the associative process of your mind, like basically think about it and start connecting ideas towards the theme of what you saw in that session of active imagination. In that way, you can also start to understand what you saw, because this feels like a dream, like a waking dream, a bunch of random images. You have to connect them and derive its meaning. And you do it by asking yourself, okay, I saw a mountain. What is a mountain? What does that mean to me? Okay, maybe it's a challenge or something like that. And through that, you can put together perhaps what the session wanted to tell you, and also enrich your symbolism of the letter or what A represents to you, or these realities that we express through an alphabet or a magical alphabet. Now, why is this important? And we will close with this. Really, you can't read it because the script is too small, but I'll guide you. This is an image from an occultist in Spain called Ramon Lol. And he was describing the different worlds that humans inhabit at the same time. It's the world of senses, the world of imagination, and the intellectual world. So how we gather images and symbols, it's basically just a reflection of the external world, right? I know what blue is because I've seen blue. I know what a human being looks like because I've seen human beings. But it's really just light being reflected into my eyes, turned, interpreted, right? Same thing with the ears, same thing with touch. Two different mechanisms, of course. And so he would ascribe each sense to one of the elements: touch to earth, smell to air, sight to fire, etc. And he would call that the mundus sensibilis, or the sensible world, the world of the senses. The world is created by the elements, so you perceive it through the elements. Through that, is where our practice of meditation really starts to take shape, because we are really making our own reality right now, each of us. We're just seeing atoms here, and our nervous system somehow is assembling a picture of reality that makes sense to us in a way that we are useful. We're useful people talking right now. But the word itself doesn't really exist as an objective reality. We're each assembling, and we each have our own. So taken to that, the meaning of something existing can take a different turn, because now it's not about if its existence is valid for everybody or authentic for everybody, but about the experience itself of you having the experience of something. Perhaps you had the experience of God appearing to you. In this case, it doesn't really matter if it's factual. If you're a Pharisee and want to know if that's an actual experience to put it into law, that's different. But in this case, it's what the experience is telling you about it. What does it mean to you, and what is it telling you? Just as the session or with active imagination, you can extract meaning from that experience. So with that, with these senses, these images, we know things like sound, color, harmony, because something sounds nice, some other things doesn't sound so nice. And our consciousness start to move. Everyone has had the sensation of feeling different after a movie or a piece of music. So through the senses, it's really how we start to assemble an internal life or inner life, where we can close our eyes and imagine bells in our minds, and eventually we'll almost hear it. Or if I ask you to remember the face of your mother, you can almost see it in your mind's eye. So what Ramon Lowe was telling us, and it's why it's important having a language in itself or our symbolic body, is because there's a process or that every occultist goes through, where there's a withdrawal of the senses. It's meditation, basically, right? Sense withdrawal, or pratyahara, like the Hindus call it, or the Buddhists have several practices for that too. And you have to have some sort of form in your mind to not just close your eyes and it be blank. You have to have an internal world inside, which is enriched by images that we perceive from the outside, from the outside world. And this middle step, which is what we do with magical alphabets, is you're taking the inputs and all the sensations from the world. For example, if I have you imagining fire in your hand for a week, I can guarantee you, in a week, you'll start having a sensation of heat in your hand. So in the same way, we can take these inputs from the world to perhaps start having a language that is much more about interpreting the symbolism of our internal faculties and our internal realities than making things outside. There's many metaphorical ways that spiritual traditions have talked about. It's like the dark night of the soul and all these kind of things, or these abysses that one has to cross. It is an abyss once you turn your senses inward, and that's why, with all this, it is important in the magical practice to not only incorporate a body of lore and teachings and philosophy and curious things that you can do, but also to try to pull the mind inwards, and perhaps just as Yolo in his message of truth against the world, even though nobody believed him, he seemed to have tapped into something that is related to the secret of the Bards of the Isle of Britain, or the secret arcanum, as Eliphas Levi called it. In a way, what they're talking about is initiation. It's about the realization that you are the one that is creating your reality. And once you can stand behind that process that you're doing, then you become the creator, because now you're no longer just from evolutionary habit putting the reality together, but you can start doing it yourself through symbols, through symbolism in a way, through meditation, on sacred passages, or on symbolic images that we get in our mental journeys to symbols. But that will slowly start as Manly Pijol says in here, as there is a physical world extending about us in nature and as nature, there is an intellectual world extending about us in thought and as thought. The branches of philosophy are like continents, races, or species in physical nature. They are intellectual environments through which man must evolve mentally, and upon the earth he evolves physically. To the layman whose consciousness is bound closely to the objects of external sense perception, the physical world with its problems seems very real, and the world of wisdom remote and indefinite. But as man lives more and more in mind and less in matter, the intellectual universe emerges as a magnificent empire, and physical concerns in their turn become remote and indefinite, which is an experience that we can see in other traditions as well, like the Buddhists, for example, which describe how everything is Maya, everything is an illusion. So that's what we have for today. There's another Manly Pijol quote in there, but we've talked about a bunch of seemingly unconnected things. But if there's one thing that I would like everybody for you to take, is that there's no way to do magic if you don't know how you're already doing it. Magic in the sense of these magicians of all that would change the weather and change the realities of the outside situations. But to achieve some of the things that these things promise as a secret knowledge, one has to know how one is already doing it, how one is already creating his own reality every time. Just by this faculty of meaning and association. If you're at night in a room and open your eyes, sometimes it takes a few seconds for you to assemble the shapes into something that means a piece of furniture. And if we get a hold of that process of meditation and do it consciously, just as we can breathe consciously or unconsciously with the autonomic nervous system, if you get a hold of that faculty, then you can do many interesting things with your mind.